Feds being business. Sorry for that recording in progress announcement there. And what we hope to accomplish in the next 90 minutes or the next hour and a half or so is really providing folks who've joined us with a real world analysis of what you need to know and how to safeguard your investments in business in what is really an evolving landscape. And before we jump right into it, I have to give a traditional disclaimer here, which is these materials have been prepared by Baker Hostetler and Norton Rose Fulbright for informational purposes only and are not legal advice. The information is not intended to create, and receipt of it does not constitute a lawyer-client relationship. Readers should not act upon this information without seeking professional counsel. You should consult a lawyer for individual advice regarding your own situation. The opinions expressed by our panel are those of the individuals and do not reflect those of the entities and corporations that employ them. And in particular, we are really very fortunate to be joined by three talented law enforcement folks here. Gary Alford from the IRS, Perry Carbone from the Southern District of New York, and Jamie Hoxie from the U.S. Attorney's Office in New Jersey. And they will, I'll just say this for them, that their opinions are not the opinions of their offices, the Department of Justice or the Department of the Treasury or the IRS, the traditional government disclosures that you normally hear at these panels. They are here just to provide their thoughts in these on this issue, but their opinions, again, do not constitute official opinions of their respective government agencies. And we're very fortunate. I know them all. They are very busy folks, and they're really here in the old saying, to help. They're here to provide guidance and to help folks avoid issues that may come out from time to time. This is a CLE, as most of us are, a lot of us listening in are lawyers, and it's important to keep our licenses, especially those like me who have sociology degrees and whose spouses would be very unhappy if we have to make a living based on that. So at 2 points, I will be giving a code which you can use for your registration. And after this, we'll be sending a link so that you can go ahead and evaluate the program and use that to get the appropriate CLE credit. So with that, let's dive into the program. And also, I want to thank Ron Quaranta, who is from the Wall Street Blockchain Alliance. That's an amazing organization that really gives a lot of guidance and really provides excellent advice to their members and is on the cutting edge of a lot of these issues. So actually, before we dive in and I introduce the rest of the panelists, Ron, I'd like you to take a minute, please, and tell us a little bit about the Alliance and the good work you folks are doing.
Absolutely, Carlos. Thank you so much. We're very grateful to be here again with all of you. Thanks to the team at Baker Hostetler and Norton Rose Fulbright. Wall Street Blockchain Alliance is a not-for-profit trade association. This is our 7th year working to guide and promote the comprehensive adoption of both crypto assets and blockchain technology across global markets. And our members are who you'd suspect, large banks and the kind of Wall Street firms. But for the past several years, so many legal practices, for example, so many accounting practices, the pervasiveness of crypto assets and cryptocurrency and blockchain technology mean that we have these conversations across multiple industry verticals. So we're grateful to be part of this, Carlos. The idea and the conversation around criminal enforcement in the cryptocurrency industry. I know so many folks had read in popular media over the past 7 or 8 years that, well, crypto doesn't need enforcement, it doesn't need laws. Our position has and always been that enforcement is what will mature this industry. So I'm absolutely looking forward to hearing colleagues from law enforcement, to hearing the legal perspectives here. Happy to answer any questions later on, Carlos, but really looking forward to a great event. And thank you for giving us the opportunity to partner with you as well.
No, thank you, Ron. Really appreciate it. As Ron mentioned, this is the second time I've been fortunate to moderate a panel with Ron and law enforcement experts. So let's go to the next slide and let me talk a little bit about our panelists. And we can go to the next slide. Thank you so much, Jill. And we are very lucky to have Gary Alford. What can I say? Gary, as he mentions here, is a special agent from the IRS. He's currently the program manager with IRSCI in the Cyber Forensic Services Headquarters section. His responsibilities include strategic policy decision-making related to IRS's CI cyber strategy, which means he is the man. He's one of the main guys in charge of IRS policy and leading the charge on virtual currency. Gary is, in addition to being a very humble guy, he was the Silk Road agent. He's actually quoted in IRS filings as an expert in this area. He is the combined Lennon and McCartney, for those of you who are Beatle fans, in getting this ball rolling for them. And is just really the guy. And we are fortunate to have him talk about what's going on with the IRS and really help out in their new areas here. Next up, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. Perry Carbone, who is so famous, he couldn't even give us his picture here today. Perry is in his 32nd year as a prosecutor. He's been in the DA's office, District of New Jersey, where I was very fortunate to work with him. And he's now been in the Southern District of New York for many years. He's been a leader in every office. Perry doesn't miss when he investigates cases, and he is going to give us some interesting perspective. He also is, he's also spoken with Eun Choi, who is the director of the country's task force, and he'll give us that perspective as well. He's also a terrific guy, a great cook, and so maybe he'll share a lasagna recipe while he's talking to us. Next person, please. Jamie Hoxie is a rock star and a rising star in this area. She is from the Garden State District of New Jersey, obviously the office John Carney and I came from. She has done some landmark work and is very in tune with what is happening at the Department of Justice in addition to doing a lot of great cases on her own. She's also a terrific person, so looking forward to hearing her thoughts. Next slide. Mei-Ling Blanco has been a tremendous bilingual white-collar prosecutor at Norton Rose Fulbright in their white-collar group, has done some very high-profile cases, including the FIFA case, the Bridgegate case, has advising companies in compliance and FCPA, and has been lecturing and writing on this topic for a significant amount of time, was honored by Seton Hall as one of their all-stars recently as well. Next slide. Now these are the old timers on the group. You've got me and John Carney. I'm a former federal prosecutor, 15 years, Department of Justice in New Jersey, former deputy acting chief. And at the tax division, I have an LLM in tax, and I've been writing about the tax enforcement issues and virtual currency for many years. Fortunate to be in the white collar group here with my colleague and longtime friend, John Carney, who was in the SEC enforcement unit, was the head of the SEC unit at the U.S. Attorney's Office in New Jersey, head of the white collar group here, has been an SEC monitor for many cases. I believe he's also a monitor now on a virtual currency case. He has been looking into these issues and writing about them as well, and he'll be talking a lot about what the SEC is up to in this area as well. So again, an all-star panel. I'm very fortunate these folks all know what they're talking about, and I'm fortunate that they're also friends of mine. So with that, let's go into the current regulatory landscape. And I think many of us know that the various federal agencies and courts have been looking into this and have had different views on how they look at virtual currency. Mei-Ling, I know you've been talking about this for a while. Can you tell us what's been out there and how the various, alphabet agencies have treated virtual currency and the various discrepancies that's out there that makes this a little bit tough to comply with?
Carlos, and thank you, and thank you for everyone who's helped organize this panel here today. Really appreciate it. So, Carlos is completely right. There's an alphabet soup really regulating this technology, and what's really interesting is that each particular agency has defined the technology a little bit different, and I think it's a reflection of sort of where we are with regards to how we view and analyze the technology. While in the beginning there was a big concern that perhaps this was just something that was operating outside of our laws, and we needed new laws to figure out how to deal with it. And it really was the Wild Wild West, where we needed new regulations and a new framework. I think what the agencies have all proven here, we have several listed, is that our existing laws that go well back are sufficient, right? So we've seen a lot of actions that have sort of carved out how the current technology really does fit into our existing laws. So if you take the SEC, for example, right, they said, hey, we've had the Howey test for forever. This technology, we're going to analyze it under the Howey test. So if it looks like a securities, it is a securities. And I think for the time being, right, we've seen cases like BlockFi, which we can talk a little bit more about, where they're defining and carving out and really demarcating how they're going to treat the technology. But essentially, we have the IRS speaking as to how it's going to be dealt with taxes. The SEC, again, is using the Howey test as to how it's going to be treated with securities. The CFTC dealing with it as potentially as a commodity, and FinCEN regulating it with regards to money laundering concerns. And overlaying all of this, we haven't talked about the DOJ, which obviously has speaks on the criminal aspect of it, as well as potential civil enforcement matters.
Okay, thank you. So now we move over to the next slide, please. So recently we have President Biden's executive order. And for folks in this industry, some folks say, he's really kind of punting. He's just kind of pushing the ball out, telling folks, deal with it. But I think a lot of folks looked at this as sort of a game changer. At least I think some of the folks here in our group did, and other law firms who study this and have a group that deals with this. Because here I think you have Biden sort of recognizing and saying, look, virtual currency, you have it all these different formats, but it's here to stay. Recognizes that there is this new form of currency associated with blockchain. We've got to start dealing with it. So as part of this, when you go through the 13-page executive order or so, he's directing all of the federal agencies and giving them timeframes to coordinate, come up with a unified reports of how we're going to treat it, what we're going to look at, telling develop a coordinated federal approach to understanding the opportunities, risks. There's obviously privacy issues, seeing if there's an opportunity for U.S. central bank digital currency, what that impact might look like somewhere down the road. Directing federal agencies to develop uniform AML guidelines. I think that's important. Folks are trying to understand, how do we do this, in an appropriate way, financial institutions. He's looking now for the United States to be a world leader in this place. So I think this is a message that this is here to stay, and we need to figure this out. So starting out, with Perry and Jamie, can you tell us a little bit about, within the Department of Justice, has this filtered down to your offices? You guys are on the front lines, obviously, in your respective offices, and I know, Jamie, you've had some cases dealing with fraud schemes because of the anonymity and the various, coins that are coming out there and different things that are there. Has this filtered down, or you guys, how does this impact your respective offices, being from some of the leading offices involved in this area?
I'll kick it off, I guess.
Thanks, Bert.
I think, look, the executive order per se, to the extent it's relevant to the Department of Justice, its relevance is that it's sort of a catalyst. It's been a catalyst, as you point out, Carlos. It's a whole of government approach, and all the agency heads have been directed to come up with a game plan and to formulate responses. And the Justice Department, so it's a good thing for us generally, as in the Justice Department and the field offices, because it causes the key stakeholders in the Justice Department and the U.S. Attorney's offices to focus more, and that can only help law enforcement. Some of the issues that affect the Justice Department, they're not new issues, but they have caused the Justice Department a renewed focus and emphasis, and that renewed focus and emphasis causes a dedication of additional resources, whether those resources be just really good and competent people who are helping formulate policies and priorities, or resources actually financial resources. In fact, and I know we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but it led directly to the creation of the National Cryptocurrency Enforcement Team by the Deputy Attorney General. So I think just at a high level, it's impacted what the Justice Department does in a very positive way.
I appreciate it. Jamie, I know that you've been involved in, obviously we're not going to ask about any specific cases, but from your level, dealing with these, with these cases, and now seeing that, the president has ordered, the department to come up with some uniform standards in this, for companies trying to get it right. I guess, have you seen that yet filter down to your level where, folks like you, who I would consider a true expert, you think you'd be asked to give any sort of input into what floats up to the top and guidance given out to how these policies are formulated at some point?
Well, I think, Carlos, certainly in the so I'm a member of the cybercrime unit in this office, and
Sure.
see a wide range of investigations and prosecutions. And certainly, to echo what Perry said, it's always great when there is renewed dedication and focus, because that helps us with resources. It helps frame the priorities, and certainly, we investigate and will prosecute crimes that, in whatever manner, criminals are using. And right now, it's a lot of cryptocurrency. And so I think that there will be an increased focus on how cryptocurrency is being used by companies, by entities, through globally, and how best to approach that from an enforcement perspective, to make sure that people are not being defrauded, and that the regulators who are charged with maintaining the integrity of our financial system have the information they need to effectively carry out that goal.
Right, that's terrific. No, that would be great, because you're right. As I said, you guys are on the front lines, and I know that certainly you are, Jamie, having known you that. So it'd be good to kind of get a sense of what's out there and what sort of, impact and what sort of guidance needs to be passed up as these get addressed, and what sort of guidance. Mei Ling and John, I know that you guys advise companies, and I know something that we've been trying to do maybe also is provide input. If you're in this space, this may be the right time maybe to look to provide input as these rules get written over the next 180 days is some of the timeframes that are out there. Because I think the last thing anybody really wants to see as this guidance gets developed now is guidance and rules that are impossible to meet, for companies that are looking to do this the right way. Any thoughts, from you guys, as you guys think through this with your clients?
Yeah, I mean, look, if there, I've had the good fortune to get reasonably heavily involved in the space in the past 18 months through touches with my firm and SEC receiverships, and so I've kind of had a crash course. And I'm an old like dinosaur who used to do money laundering cases when I was in the U.S. Attorney's office, and basically people flew to the Cayman Islands with $10,000 stuffs in their boots, and that was really old school money laundering. And it's gotten more and more sophisticated. So what very often people will ask me, or clients will say, hey, what's new or what's really changing? And I'll say, not that much in some government initiative. But this is really, I think, a huge sea change, because it's upending, it could upend the way banking works, upend the way the markets work, securities markets, commodities markets. And so, there is that kind of, thought now on whether, the regulators are kind of catching up to the technology. I think they will. But for now, it's like, a lot of the bigger companies are not necessarily getting into it, but they realize, hey, if you're going to start accepting, cryptocurrency, if Elon Musk at Tesla is going to accept cryptocurrency, what does that mean? And is all cryptocurrency the same? And then we start, looking at, tax and money laundering issues. So that's what we're seeing. I think we're probably a little bit behind, except for individuals. But I'd be super curious from Jamie and from Perry, to know the level of saturation that this has like gotten. I mean, is it like, you know, you could find very, you know, very sophisticated Swiss bankers who are now using cryptocurrency, and they're like James Bond bad guys. Well, that's one level of criminal. But then there's the you know, the knuckleheads who are just, you know, local drug conspiracies. Are they into crypto now to avoid, you know, traceability? So I'll let Maylene go too, but that's a question I'd like to ask the prosecutors.
Yeah, and I want to definitely ask Maylene, because I know she's got some thought. But let me just check in with Gary, because I know Gary at the Treasury and at the national level. Are you guys seeing anything there or this impact? I mean, obviously with FinCEN, you know, and all the various reporting requirements that are actually going to be developed as to how to deal with this as this gets developed.
Absolutely. And as Perry mentioned, and has been mentioned previously, it's sort of an alphabet soup. So I think the initiative is to get some of the subject matter experts and give their input. And so I can't say maybe that's part of the reason I got pulled out of operations and put into HQ. So I got put in January. So it seems like, yes, I've been on some of the working groups and I've responded to some of the calls, because Treasury, we have some experience in terms of international law enforcement, regulatory, with our relationship with FinCEN. And I think the sea change potentially, and I don't want to speak, this is my view, is potentially the stablecoin issue, because you have stable coins which come in and they're pegged to the US dollar. And I think that brings in potential payments, and you know, I'm starting to learn this, and potential risks in terms of run risk and things that potentially other agencies you don't really think about, let's say in a law enforcement perspective. So I think it's, from my perspective, it's trying to get the actual smartest people in the room and just to give their input. So then see where we are. Where is this agency? What are you seeing at this agency? Because it's going to take a total government approach, as Perry mentioned, and between the public and private sector before decisions are made, because there is that stable coin. And I think there's an interest in keeping it pegged to the US dollar. People can see some of the world events and see that there is an interest in the US dollar. It's still very important. So that's what I have seen just in my personal in the last few months.
Interesting. Maylene?
So just to I think just to add a little bit to what everyone else has said, which I completely agree with. I think the executive order is a recognition that this technology is here to stay, and we really have to deal with it. That it's not a technology of only criminality, right? Where maybe cases like early on, we all thought if you're dealing with crypto, you must be a criminal, right? Like I think there's a recognition now that technology has a legitimate purpose, and then how do we ensure the stability of the integrity of our financial system, like Jamie said, right? By identifying the criminal actors within that system and following the money. And I think this is a holistic approach to that. And really recognizing that without dealing with those issues, we're being presented with serious national security concerns. We all lived through the summer where there was a ransomware that had to be paid in crypto because there was a concern about whether our oil pipelines would shut down. So it is a real, and that's just the ones that make the news. There's many others that don't make the news. And so there's a real concern that it's being used, it's being exploited. And I think, and many pieces along those lines, I think are going to be investigated. And I think that's where the real exposure is that's coming down the pipe.
Yeah, and certainly it's going to be interesting to see, you know, as a lot of other countries look to develop national digital currency, whether the US then follows suit and now develops their own CBDC. So let's move along though. So let's go to the next slide, please, Jill. So now the enforcement regime, and obviously, but there clearly are a lot of agencies involved with this. Obviously, there's OFAC dealing with sanctions for virtual currency, the Department of Justice, the CFTC, Treasury. A lot of folks are involved. But rolling on to the next slide, please, Jill. They all, but I think at the end of the day, you know, it rolls up to the Department of Justice, you know, who really take over once you start getting into the prosecution of individuals. You're dealing with corporate settlements. And as I said, we are very fortunate to have both Perry and Jamie here to deal with, you know, what's going on. And again, over the last year, so much has happened, you know, with in October 21, the formation of the National Cryptocurrency Enforcement Team. And this, you know, the slide here tells us a little bit more about that. And then certainly in February, of this year with the appointment of Young Choi from the Southern District, or as she's known as EYC, to those there. And Mei Ling and I were fortunate to deal with EYC on an incredibly complex case that she inherited that had a significant number of issues. And to her credit, she stepped in and stepped in and really helped resolve it, took over, dealt with some very, very challenging issues. She's a super smart, talented attorney, and was able to get to the right result, very quickly. And I was really happy to see that she's taking over. When you're the first of anything, and especially dealing with something so incredibly complex, it's good to see that somebody who is dedicated, smart, and fair is at the helm. And so let me start maybe with you, Perry, because I know that she's running this. So I know you've had an opportunity maybe to speak to her in general, maybe share with us some of the thoughts that we may seeing with this first of its kind task force.
Yeah, I mean, look, so this, as I mentioned earlier, and I think you mentioned as well, this enforcement team or task force, if you want to call it that, was sort of a direct response to the Biden executive order, which happened, it was created in the fall. And then when Young Choi was appointed to be the director of the team, and you're absolutely right. I can't think of a more qualified candidate. EYC is a highly experienced prosecutor, and she's a nationally recognized expert on financial crimes generally and crypto crimes more specifically. She was the cyber coordinator here in the Southern for several years, where she prosecuted a host of complex fraud cases, including many cybercrime cases as well. So this group is housed in the department's criminal division. They have more than a dozen very experienced prosecutors, and it's really intended to be something of a one-stop shop of all subject matter experts within the department. So a dozen people now, it's growing, and they're going to expand significantly. What is their focus? The focus at a high level is to lead the department's efforts to sort of catalog and dismantle the misuse of cryptocurrencies and other digital assets. They're going to coordinate the department's activities through the field offices, law enforcement agencies, regulatory bodies that Mei Ling mentioned, as well as private industry. They will enhance the criminal division's efforts to provide support and training to field offices, federal agencies, state and local and international law enforcement agencies who are partners in fighting crypto abuse. They're going to be supporting the existing cases that are pending in the department and the U.S. Attorney's offices, as well as creating and pursuing their own new cutting-edge investigations. And as I mentioned, they're going to be drawing on private sector resources. One of the things that they're going to be doing is calling on private sector companies that have very effective AML policies and strong compliance programs. And they're going to draw on their expertise and learning and sort of include them in the discussion because they're the ones who are most likely to see what's going on.
That's interesting. So I guess, so they'll be looking to them to try to get a sense of what's working, what's helpful, and embracing that to sort of look into trying to get this right, which is good. So do you see an opportunity there? And obviously this is just for companies that they feel are doing it right, trying to understand this. I know that with the new DOJ guidelines that came out maybe now almost 2 years ago, that was an effort to put in place real compliance, not sort of, really, they've been saying it for years, right? But it was the first time you really see it in a written policy where we want real world compliance. We want companies to really sit down and assess risk. So obviously this is a risk, right? The anonymity that virtual coins, virtual currency offers. So I guess there's a possibility for fraud schemes that exist out there. Obviously money laundering because of the anonymity. And so you get a sense of what sort of crimes they may be starting to focus on. Those are some of the obvious ones, but, and then Jamie, please jump in too, because I know that this may be, I know that you work closely with the national folks and deal with them a lot too. And just on this national level, and then maybe after that, we can get back to what's happening, you know, in the field offices. I know there's main justice and then there's the field offices, you know, who to do that. But Jamie, please jump in also with your interactions with, and if you had interactions with this sort of national, because I know you do this on a national level and coordinate with them because you are, you know, a true expert in this prosecution world.
Yeah, I think that the team is still in its, I mean, they've hit the ground running, certainly from what we can see, but I think I'm probably in a better position to talk about what I see on the line, which is to answer John, your question is how pervasive is this? Are we seeing this? We're seeing it everywhere. It is not limited to a particular type of criminal, a particular type of crime. It touches the majority, if not all of our buckets of investigations. And I'm happy to talk about that more, but certainly I think that we're seeing this in every type of investigation that we have.
Well, let's just jump right into that, Jimmy. What types? How are you seeing that in your investigations? And can you give us a sense of? Obviously, in New Jersey, I'm not surprised. You're seeing a lot of that, and I'm from New Jersey. I live in New Jersey, so we used to describe it as a target-rich environment when I was in the office. If you could share, tell us what you're seeing and what types of schemes and what you guys are up to.
So certainly, I think we're seeing this in both what you would call traditional blue-collar cases and in more sophisticated, or what we would traditionally think of as white-collar cases. We're seeing it as a basis for fraud. We're seeing it as a basis in securities fraud cases. Certainly, when cryptocurrency was less used or less recognized by the public, we saw various fraud schemes, and we're continuing to see various fraud schemes where criminals are trying to prey on the general public's lack of knowledge about how cryptocurrency works, how cryptocurrency is mined, how that process works, in order to effectuate fraud schemes and really prey on members of the general public that maybe have heard of Bitcoin or heard of emerging technologies, but aren't really sophisticated or don't really understand what all of it entails. We see a lot of cryptocurrency being used in our romance scam cases, which romance scams commonly target, well, they target everyone, but unfortunately often target our more senior or elderly community. We've seen cryptocurrency being used both as a means to launder money, but also like we've seen instances where rather than have a romance scam victim open a bank account and provide access to the bank account, now we're seeing a romance scam victim being asked to open up an account, a crypto wallet or an account on an exchange, and then provide actors with access to those accounts so that they can move money, often overseas. It's viewed as an easier way to move money overseas, and certainly a more anonymous way. But what I've seen is our agency partners have good relationships and with our overseas partners, and we've been successful in obtaining evidence from exchanges that are overseas to use that in prosecution. And at least what I've seen is, we're obviously interested in, defendants or actors that are in the United States and in our country, but we're seeing a more global kind of network of bad actors who are able to use crypto to victimize U.S. citizens, and from the comfort of their laptop anywhere in the world. And as law enforcement continues to ramp up their enforcement efforts and resources, it makes it easier for us to go after the wrongdoers who are overseas and not just here in the United States. We've also seen an emphasis on companies and individuals who are using crypto to try to thwart US regulators, whether it's just an overt violation of Bank Secrecy Act, an overt violation of the money transmitting law at 1960, or it's maybe not a specific violation of these these more traditional statutes, but truly is just being done to defraud the US government. And that obviously would provide exposure, criminal liability for a sort of Klein conspiracy, an argument that the basis for using the cryptocurrency or the transactions are being used to defraud the US regulators. So we've seen it in a variety of different buckets from a prosecution perspective. And obviously another piece that we are working with and seeing crypto in addition to the traditional prosecutions is in asset forfeiture. We're seeing that the resources of the department coming through to seize the contents of wallets, to seize Bitcoin, and on all levels, whether it's Bitcoin held at an international exchange, Bitcoin held at a exchange here in the United States, or certainly hard wallets that we're seeing when we are doing just traditional search warrants premises. Law enforcement is becoming more and more familiar with what to look for. And we are, I think maybe a while back, you could have your seed phrases or your private keys, written, and maybe a law enforcement officer wouldn't know what to look for and overlook that. And I don't think that's the case anymore.
Let me ask you, is it fair to say that as time goes on, I mean, obviously, that the various U.S. attorneys' offices are becoming smarter, that there's now, that you guys have sort of caught up to the technology, and is there a sharing of information amongst the various offices? So let's say New Jersey and Southern District being bigger offices, you can devote more resources to this, to learning it, than just saying a New Hampshire or Kansas. Are you guys sharing information across the offices? Is there, is that something maybe that this national group is doing just to make sure that everybody's up to speed, that these folks can't sort of set up shop in different places? Is that happening? Or, and just throw that out there as you guys get smarter and learn this stuff, because it sounds like you guys are really catching up and really advancing now to these new levels.
Yeah, I think that certainly we're watching. I think that we're smart, and law enforcement is very sophisticated when it comes to keeping up with the technology and finding ways to use the tools that we have and the statutes that we have and the enforcement mechanisms that we have, and explaining to courts and juries when necessary how this new technology is merely being used to do the same things that criminals have been doing for forever. And so, it is keeping up with the emerging technology and explaining to courts how it still fits in the traditional framework that we've been using is always interesting and sometimes a challenge, but we're definitely up for it. And we're certainly seeing across the nation different judges and courts who are very familiar with this technology and very familiar with kind of the methods and some of the tools that law enforcement use to interact and kind of maintain an evidentiary track of this type of technology.
That's right, because when you think through it, right, there's so much that goes into it, going in and getting a search warrant, going in and educating a magistrate on where the evidence lies, how to gather the evidence, gathering offshore evidences has got to be, challenging in that regard as well. So, and I imagine too, when if a company is going to cooperate, and getting information that is offshore as well, all of these are interesting issues that I imagine now have to come up, because there is going to be evidence that is based offshore that you're going to need to continue these investigations. So that's something. Are you guys starting to see that, face that, and and is there any sort of, how has that been going for you guys? And maybe Perry, you could start with that, or no?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, look, there's no question that the collaboration with our international partners has gotten much stronger, much more sophisticated. And one point that your question raises, like Jamie just did an excellent job of summarizing all the ways in which cryptos come up and what we're seeing. One other way is the use of crypto in tax crimes, which I know we're going to talk about a little more later.
Sure.
And this can typically be done in one of two ways. Either you can divert receipts. A legitimate business can just divert receipts. And I'm not talking about like the income in the sense of illegal, unlawful activity like drug trafficking proceeds. I mean, legitimate businesses who can divert receipts into crypto, or trading crypto and not reporting trade, because of course crypto's an asset and property, and when you buy and sell it, that's a taxable event. Our law enforcement partners in other countries have been tremendously helpful. There's, like I said, so much more coordination going on, and I'm sure Gary could even shed some light on that from the IRS's perspective. But it's we're much further along than we were even a year, 2, 3 years ago.
Yeah, and in tracing assets too, it seems like you guys have done a tremendous job in that regard. I mean, it seems like you guys have really advanced the ball on that. And any comments on that, guys? I know there's a mention here of the launch of Klepto Capture. Do either of you guys want to comment on that for a minute? Or
I can't comment on Klepto Capture, but what I can mention is there was a recent District of DC opinion in February, so a couple months ago at this point, and it was very interesting. The court's analysis, where it was a memorandum issued in response to the government trying to execute search warrants, and the court acknowledged and gave an excellent summary of how Chainalysis and these types of tools could be used, specifically with clustering, to support a probable cause determination. And so I think we're certainly seeing law enforcement. I don't think catch up is the right term necessarily, but it is using the technology that it's developing in support of our mission in investigating these crimes.
Well, that's actually really interesting, Jamie. Thanks. No, because without that, an explanation of being able to understand the technology and being able to explain it, which is a great point you make, you're not going to be able to get that evidence. So without the evidence, you can't make cases. So that's a critical thing. So thank you, guys. So let me move along to the next slide, which is the CLE, which is Baker. I've heard of that. Baker 1. So that is the first CLE code, Baker 1. Okay, so with that, we'll now move over to another slide, the renewed focus on corporate crime. And obviously, there's been a lot of guidance and a lot of reports that have come out of the Main Justice. And Lisa Monaco has issued several statements, and some came out at the various ABA white collar crime conferences, one in Miami in October of last year. She issued more statements about pursuing white collar prosecutions, some of the states she said here. And of course, as always, the failure to implement corporate compliance programs. I mean, in this day and age, for companies not to have a corporate compliance program is honestly it really doesn't make much sense. And we mentioned before the real world guidance that came out in June of I believe it was 2020. And obviously, one of the things that was mentioned strongly there was, risk analysis and real world risk analysis that, that they talked about. So I guess, Perry, let me start off with you, because I know we've talked about this in the past. The use of virtual currency in a company or company that is involved in this industry. Obviously, AML, fraud, data privacy issues, or misusing that information, these various schemes. Obviously, the failure to address those risks in a compliance program, and if something happened afterwards, I imagine that would be problematic if for a company that didn't do that and addressed it in their compliance. Is that fair to say?
Sure. I mean, look, it's certainly, and I think the Deputy AG Monaco's comments are really kind of geared toward explaining and emphasizing and reemphasizing what the department's policies are on corporate liability. So to answer your question, look, due diligence is certainly one of the fill factors. Having a robust AML program and a compliance program that actually works is very important. It's one of the factors, one of the fill factors that prosecutors will consider in evaluating corporate liability and how to address issues that arise during an investigation when there's corporate liability. We'll certainly consider if a company is doing due diligence and acquires a new company. We'll certainly consider how thorough that due diligence was. We'll certainly also consider that when a company is taking over another company, that they're innocent parties, innocent shareholders, and so we're going to consider that as a factor, and along with all the full factors. And there's no question that turning a blind eye and having a completely ineffective program is a negative in terms of the department's evaluation of corporate liability. And certainly having a good and effective AML program and a compliance program that appropriately addresses crypto issues is going to be a factor in their favor.
Yeah, and Jamie, I would imagine too, right, that if a company is involved in this industry, that some of the risks they would have to address would be AML. You mentioned, fraud. Is there any? Can you give us your thoughts on that as well, please?
Certainly, I think that if a company's involved with crypto, depending on what they're doing, money transmitting needs to be something they're thinking about under 1960. And certainly if they are operating without a compliance program that addresses their cryptocurrency transactions, they're going to, depending on the circumstances, there could be exposure for violations of the Bank Secrecy Act, failing to file SARs, all of those things. And those are charges that we are looking at. We're not just looking at money laundering. We are looking at all of these types of what, sometimes are argued to be just regulatory violations. But in this state, they are, we're in the land of willfulness. If you are operating these types of transactions at a corporate level, and you're not following the regulatory scheme, and certainly, as I mentioned, that even if there is not strong evidence of a substantive violation of one of these charges, you certainly have exposure for an argument that your entity and the high-level individuals operating that entity are engaged in a client conspiracy, and the purpose of what they are doing is to try to thwart U.S. regulation, which would be a violation of 371.
Wow. So there's also, as you mentioned, then too, prosecution exposure for high-level executives and folks involved, right? So that's something that you guys DOJ's now made no secret that they're looking at those high-level folks, because companies exist through the individuals and these acts are committed by individuals.
Yes, certainly. We're looking at entities and individuals who are engaged in this. And the focus obviously is on the practicality. What are they actually doing? We are, it's trying to hide behind technicalities or, corporate form sometimes is not going to be effective. If your entity or you as an individual are engaging in these kind of violations and trying to evade US law enforcement, you are subjecting yourself to criminal exposure.
So,
Yeah.
Carlos, can I ask some follow up on that?
Yeah.
So it seems to me that I've heard some people say, that there's really no good reason or very little reason to use cryptocurrency versus the establishment unless you're just about the secrecy. And so one question I have now for for the prosecutors is the fact, we're not talking about a business that is a crypto business, but a business that is transmitting with crypto. Is that a red flag now? Is that something like, why are they doing this? Why does a business, business using cryptocurrency instead of just using any of the normal forms of banking, which are more traceable? Is that something that's like, I know it's not an element of the offense, but is that a flag? Perry?
I think crypto is becoming more mainstream, and it may be something to look at, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. It depends on what they're doing with it. Are they using crypto to facilitate business in a legitimate way, or are they using crypto to divert receipts? I think it really, that question really can only be answered by digging into the facts of each case, looking at what they're doing and what the results are, and how careful they are in their compliance program to make sure that their own company and the companies that they're dealing with aren't engaging in any illicit activities. So I don't think there's an easy answer to that.
Right. I mean, it seems to me that there's a world of difference between individuals and companies that want to commit crime or either the proceeds of the crime, and that's just traditional. That there's other violations that crypto kind of adds on to it versus like, hey, I'm an import-exporting business in New Jersey or New York, and I accept crypto, for the shipment of goods. I mean, how much diligence can a company, small company too, mind you, we're not talking about like a giant company here with compliance officers, but a smaller company saying, hey, by its very nature, I don't know the provenance of these funds. I know who the customer is, and so I guess I'm kind of struggling for the mom and pop business that actually will be accepting crypto now. But we don't want to say they're still doing money laundering or structuring or any other kind of crazy crime. So what is it that they can do, or is there anything that they can do?
I think you can have a legitimate and effective AML know your customer program. If you are accepting crypto from a customer, who is your customer? Where do you have any reason to believe that the source of the proceeds are ill-gotten gain? Are you reporting your receipts? So I think look, it's a transition period, and I think Gary mentioned the other day, they sooner or later, things are going to be. I think there's some new regulations on, currency reporting requirements, and Gary, chime in if I'm misremembering this, but the 8300s are now crypto transactions are considered reportable under 8300s, which an 8300 is just a form that has to be filed to report cash or cash equivalents in a trade or business.
Yeah, since we're moving along, why don't we jump into the IRS part of this, because I know that there's a lot there, and that's a great question, John. Is what are the reporting requirements, and for companies who are dealing with crypto, and now obviously with a lot happening with taxpayers. So, Gary, there's so much happening with the IRS and these reporting requirements. We put up here just for everybody to see. Obviously, when you're filing your tax returns, there's this This is the second year of this question, and the IRS also issued an IRS notice to literally make it even more simple about who has to check yes and who has to check no. That came out about a month ago. And then if you go to the next slide, we're talking about more IRS enforcement efforts, and there's a whole lot here. Operation Hidden Treasure. Jill, if you go, that was formed before, and literally a task force that came out in March to track this. If you go to and I'm just going to go through these slides quickly because I know Gary can just talk to them all. But just folks see, there's now in 2017, 2018, there was the Coinbase John Doe summons, the 10,000 letters that came out. 2021 saw 2 more of these John Doe summonses, with Kraken, with Polynex. And then if we could jump to slide 16, though, this is one here. Where the Kraken response I think is really important because Gary, we've gone through a bunch of these, but obviously the IRS has made this a big priority. There's a slide coming up that they talk about what is happening, but I think Kraken response, which actually mentions you, Gary, cites you as an expert in this world and what's happening with the IRS and gathering information. The Coinbase summons only asks for a limited amount of information, I think, from the exchange holders and people there. Kraken, though, expands that to now they're getting phone numbers, IP addresses, all of this information, which shows now that the IRS has gathered a significant volume of data from global sources and are using it now with, like Perry and Jamie talked about, going outside and gathering industry experts to help understand this. So with that, I apologize, long lead in. Gary, from Silk Road to now, tell us about, how the IRS is addressing this significant compliance program and what's happening. And I expect we're going to see a lot of cases in the near future.
Well, wow. A lot has happened since 2013. I almost feel dating myself when I think about the case. But one thing I would say is, if in my bio, people should remember I used to be a revenue agent. So one thing, so this is not new. So people who are in the tax business know about 26 USC 61. So it is income unless the government says it is not. And for those who don't know, that is like set in stone because that tracks the 16th Amendment. So the 16th Amendment language kind of says the same thing in 26 USC 61.
Isn't that unconstitutional, the 16th Amendment? I remember seeing some folks saying that from Alaska.
Yes, I've seen some people say that, and they've said that sometimes from behind bars. So they have made these arguments, but that 16th Amendment, I still see it there. So they can speak to their representative about that. But I would say is, in 2013, that was kind of our first foray. I almost laugh about it because I remember when I started the case, almost no one knew anything about Bitcoin, but people have to understand. So 2013, we get in. 2014, we already started CCUs and the IRS sends out the notice. Now, the issue is, and Perry knows of this, and people who work in DOJ, there's a high bar for tax cases, and it's called willfulness, and it's specific willfulness. So back then, it's hard to make a case if no one on the jury would even know what Bitcoin is. But I saw that, talking about that slide on the 1040, and I still am amazed by this. But it's actually the third time it featured on the 1040. Now, the first year was in 2019, it was on the Schedule 1. So it wasn't on the face of the return. So let's take it to baseball. So maybe that's on the outside corner, strike one. Well, the next 2 years, it's right down the middle. You can't miss that question. It's on 2020 right there. In 2021, I did my taxes, and I remember I did it with some software. It comes up right on the screen. So I would probably use that that would be a great exhibit. Oh, I didn't know about that. You didn't see this pop up when you went to your tax professional? It was clear. So now that's the issue. We have known there's some issues in terms of taxation. So just some of the things that IRS has done. I mentioned we stood up CCUs. The next year, we in conjunction with our law enforcement partners, we seized.
Eric, can I ask what's a CTU, please? I'm sorry.
CCU, the cybercrime unit. So we said cybercrime units in DC and LA. That kind of just shows the priority we put to it, because the IRS usually doesn't move that quickly if people have worked with the IRS. Then there was an auction the next year in 2015 of the Silk Road Bitcoins. And that was I think a sea change, because it kind of showed that we handled that the same way any other asset. So it kind of showed that we weren't saying that crypto was illegal. We were just seizing it like anything else, like a seized car, seized house, and auctioned it. But the next year, 2016, we set up Cyber HQ. Years later, 2019, we have a cyber support unit in HQ. And this kind of follows my career. So now I'm in HQ. So this is, we think now, like I said, 1, 2, 3, we kind of spoke it into existence. This is the reason why we do these presentations, because we don't want the first time people deal with this issue is when there's a knock on the door. So I think at this point, it's going to be hard for someone to say that they don't know what Bitcoin is. It's hard for them to say that they don't know it affects their tax returns. So every case will be on a case-by-case basis, but as hidden treasure and all these enforcement actions or these actions should be a hint to taxpayers that we are taking this very seriously, and that we think now is a time we should start making tax cases, because we think there's always been some issue of non-compliance, but in terms of the law, it's been an issue of willfulness. And with the president speaking on the executive order, which basically he's speaking for every American, it's going to be hard for, I think, someone to sit in front of a jury or make a case that you didn't know that you were making money. And it still gets back to that original law, if you're making money. So I would say the IRS, we have been at the forefront, but the big thing is how you're using it. So I think they mentioned about, there's a question in the chat about money transmitter laws. And I just want to speak to that. So I think in December 2021, there was a GAO report about cryptocurrencies in terms of crypto kiosks. I was on that working group. So we made proposals to, it's like me talking to my wife. We can't make recommendations. We can make proposals because FinCEN is the actual one with authority. But we made proposals about the money transmitter law. So that might be coming down the pike in the next 6 months. And in terms of the 8300, the Infrastructure Act, if people aren't aware, it changed the rules for 26 USC 6050I, which basically means if you receive more than 10,000 or 10,000 or more of crypto in your business, you will have to file some form of an 8300. That's a sea change, because just for example, I think this kind of discussed, if you receive $10,000 of, let's say, fiat currency, you bought a car for $20,000 worth of cash. While that might have some questions, that in and of itself does not speak to potentially a taxable event. If you buy that car with $20,000 worth of crypto, that is a disposition potentially of a capital asset, which means there could be tax implications. That is big. So potentially every 8300 that is filed potentially could have a tax component. So that is something that is a big sea change for people in the private industry. And it is a big sea change for those on the IRS side, because a lot of times that potentially did not have some kind of implications. So there is discussion internally about how that's going to be handled, because that is going to be a big thing. So if someone received $50,000 for their goods, they're going to, in theory, would have to report that they received it, where they received it from. And then with some of these tools, they'll basically say, well, what was the basis of that disposition, if that makes sense. So I do foresee in the future, we will be making, I hope we don't make significant, that's why we do these kind of presentations, but I suspect we will be making lots of tax cases in the future.
And go ahead, Perry, please.
Yeah, I just want to give Gary and the IRS a little bit of applaud. I do think Gary's right. You know, the IRS has been way out in front on this. And, you know, there are a couple of important principles. One is it's not the mission of the IRS, the government, to prosecute every criminal tax violation. It's to encourage voluntary compliance through deterrence. And what the IRS has done is very, very methodically and carefully had a long ramp up to where we are today, which is there's a question on the front of the form. and that's to give people to treat taxpayers fairly and to educate them and to encourage them and to educate them on what a taxable event is and to make sure that people understand that just using crypto is not a way to to not pay taxes. And so the IRS really deserves a lot of credit for the way they've handled this. They've done a lot of, they sent out notices, they did a lot of education. And now we're at a point where that sort of honeymoon period is over. And now we're going to see more enforcement actions.
I think, Per, you mentioned that question on the 1040 was a game changer. I think it's going to be hard to say, I didn't know you had to report these transactions, because if it's right there and then to bootstrap it, you've got this IRS notice, which literally says, when can taxpayers check no, when taxpayers must check yes. I mean, I think you're right. I think they're laying out this approach that, back in when Coinbase happened, I think 3% of folks were reporting virtual currency transactions. So there's a significant volume. And, I think for a lot of us who've been watching this, sort of see it as a Swiss bank approach too. You start with the John Doe summons, you go after the institutions that are facilitating this. And that's then, then there's the next folks. And that you have the 10,000 letters to the taxpayers resulting from the first Coinbase. And I know, Gary, do you foresee then, obviously with this, there's the John Doe summons, which is a rare enforcement mechanism. But I think, Gary, obviously that was something that had to be used. I guess it shows the IRS's efforts now to come after this. Is that fair to say that we're at that point now where tax investigations take a while? So you've been seeing this. And if I could please jump to slide number 19. Jamie, Jill. So here you have the J5, which again, you talk about the IRS maybe leading the way or in some way. You have the Joint Chiefs of Global Tax Enforcement. You have an actual formal arrangement that the IRS has formed with Canada, the UK, Australia, and the Netherlands to share tax information. Formed in 2018, meeting in 2019, talking about 50 entities under investigation with a formalized. And I think, Jamie, this talks to what you mentioned about, now much more significant global exchange of information, and the Kraken summons actually citing this and talking about how we need information now in a format so we could share it and use this global information to make it friendly. So I think, you're really seeing this now. And I think you're also seeing prosecution of global entities and individuals who facilitate tax evasion, money laundering, and other types of crimes.
So Carlos, hey, it's John. I got a question. Sorry, just a video and everything. I got a question. How much is, and maybe it's for Gary, it's like what kind of volume has the IRS been able to see as far as like transactions being conducted? And if you take me back, say 2013, 7 years, how has it been growing, and is there a good beat on that?
I think back in the beginning, I remember when we were doing an investigation to Silk Road, I think someone said, it was a credible source, that somewhere like 50% of the activity was going through Silk Road. But I think recently there was a study, it was by one of the tracking companies. I think it was something like 0.35%. So going back to 2013, we saw firsthand, there was a lot of use of it, because people have to remember, if you're buying drugs, you were buying with Bitcoin, we could see that there was Americans getting Bitcoin or selling drugs. These are all potentially taxable events, but there was a willfulness. So think of all the cases that DOJ and all the law enforcement partners and IRS has been involved in that involved Americans. So if you look at the John Doe summons, just from a simple standpoint, it kind of just says, we know that there are people not reporting. We see how many people are actually using this and how many people are actually reporting a Schedule D that mentions crypto. And they can see how much the ramp up. Just look at the value of cryptocurrency in the, let's say, last 8 years. Well, they can see. So that's where the John Doe summons comes out. Is like, we live in the US where the taxpayer is given the benefit of the doubt. So it's voluntary compliance. So we can't prospectively say, oh, we think there's going to be non-compliance. We have to wait and see. And as Perry said, I think the honeymoon period is over. If the first time, I mean, people go look at the 1040. The 1040 goes back decades. That question is right under the name. So there's no key. That is, they don't do that by accident. So that shows the priority. So we know that. Just look at how many businesses in the US, how many people are using crypto? Well, as Mei Ling mentioned, the IRS views sometimes it as property. So every time you dispose, there's potentially an event. Doesn't mean there is something taxable, but potentially there may be some reporting requirement. So I think it's just about how much use people are using. And I think from volume, I don't want to give a key, but it's widespread. It's widespread to the point where I give just anecdotally, when I started, no one cared about it. But now almost all my friends, family, they talk about it. So it's just ubiquitous. So people use it. And if you're going to buy and then sell it, if you're going to use it in your business, there potentially is tax implications. So
right.
that's
a question I had too, because obviously we've been talking about money laundering situations, money transmitting, but there's a whole bunch of folks that I've come across just casually in my practice where their kids or somebody else who were actually mining Bitcoin or actually got involved in cryptocurrency, and then went out and bought a brand new car, and it was like, you realize that sale was taxable. Right. And so, and I would think there's a fair amount of people that just, they're not criminals necessarily, but, we're not criminals, but there are, folks of a significant number who just don't realize that's just like a stock or a bond. When you sell it, you're going to have to have a gain, be it short term or long term. So I guess that's in the IRS mix, right?
Well, I would say that's why we have a way of amending tax returns. So this is why we do the outreach. As Perry said, it's kind of strange. We work in law enforcement, so that's my job to make cases. But in the grand scheme, we don't want to make cases. It's about voluntary compliance. So if we're going to make a case, there's going to be the question: did anyone tell you that they should put? Yeah, my friend. Oh, did they ask you this question? Did your CPA? Did your tax plan prepare? I don't think a CPA would be able to prepare a tax return and not ask that question. So we're going to go. Did you ask your client? What did they say? Did you fill out the form? Okay, can I have a copy of that? This is probably going to be evidence. So that's why we're doing this. I don't want to give people advice, but that's why we have amending. And if you can get to us before we knock on the door, that's voluntary compliance. So we have ways of correcting that. So hopefully, if anyone hears these, try to get it, because we don't have a vested interest in putting so many people. We just want to put the most high profile, the most people who are really abusive in terms of taxes. So that's why we do these types of things. And yes, you are correct. We do believe that.
So what I hear you saying, though, Gary, is that these people should call Carlos, Naomi, and me now. Get ahead of this.
Well, it's complicated too, because they sent out those 10,000 letters, which had various degrees of, we found this, and if you get what you want it, to Gary's point, you want to take a look at this before you get one of those letters. And Coinbase generated 10,000. Who knows how many more are going to come out? And so far, what's been interesting is there has not been, like offshore. There was an offshore streamlined disclosure program. There has not been. There's been talk about it, but to date, there has not been a offshore or a special streamlined disclosure program announced by the IRS for virtual currency. So you're stuck with that very difficult, disclosure. If you want to go voluntary disclosure right now and get into that program so you sleep at night, you're looking at a 75% penalty for for different things. So it's a complex decision that you're going to have to make before you get those letters. But if you're faced now with making that decision, because you have to now check yes, it invites a look back in prior years. So it's a very complicated decision. But to Gary's point, it's because nobody was declaring this. And I think if you're in this industry, and we're running out of time, but just some very quick pointed questions to Perry and Jamie, and then Mei Ling and John, and Gary. If you're in this industry, and let's say later on a taxpayer comes up and says, "Look, I did this because I was dealing with an exchange, and the guys who were the sales rep for the exchange told me, hey, we use our coin, use our exchange because we make sure the IRS doesn't tell us about it." And later on, the sales reps or somebody was marketing that in the virtual currency. I imagine if you guys look at that company and find out that 2 or 3 people were doing that because surprisingly, taxpayers are looking to roll over on people so they don't go to jail. And that wasn't addressed in the compliance program for that company. Imagine that company is going to have an issue if they didn't view tax evasion as a risk, right, guys? That's it.
Well, I see
Yeah,
it.
absolutely.
Yeah, for either Perry or Jamie.
Yeah, I think it's, sorry, go Perry, go ahead.
Well, Perry's going to go talking, Jamie. You can jump in on this one.
No,
Yeah,
I mean,
please do.
certainly if you have company, if you're a company and you are, telling your customers or flagrantly boasting that you are not, being truthful or compliant with regulators, then yes, like that will be something that we are looking at, and that, you will have exposure, not just for trying to defraud the IRS necessarily, but for, trying to defraud the financial system in the US.
Right. I think you'd also want to make sure that you look at your marketing materials, right? And because I'm assuming tax evasion now is a risk, along with AML and fraud and other things that you'd want to make sure in your risk assessments you're looking at, I guess, right? And it would be problematic not to even have looked at that, I would guess, right, guys?
Certainly. I mean, we have, we've seen this. I've seen this.
Oh, wow.
Entities are telling customers, don't worry, we're not sharing information, we're not telling the IRS. And that is what we would call a bad fact.
That fair enough. And Perry, do you imagine if you have a private equity fund and you're putting one of your persons as a board member, which a lot of the funds do these days, I imagine that would be something you'd want to be sure that if you're acquiring a company and in your portfolio, you'd want to be sure that, because there could be liability rolling up in that regard in some of these instances.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to want to do your due diligence and look, when you're acquiring a company, you're going to want to know what kind of compliance program they have and what are they telling people, because that's, you're acquiring the liabilities too, right? So if you see a company that's been doing that, you better think long and hard about what could happen down the road.
Because the risk could roll up to a board member and a portfolio company for a private equity fund, I guess, even nowadays. I mean, I've represented board members in that scenario. Yeah. So, Mei Ling, I know that you've been very patient. I know any advice then to these boards and to these companies?
No, I think everyone's mentioned the evaluation of a corporate compliance program that the Department of Justice updated a few years ago. And I think there's some really good things to take away from there. We talked about risk-based, but I think when companies start to either operate or accept crypto, I think we need to have a recognition that that's a heightened risk, right? And you should be treating it in that way, right? Because we all know that dealing in crypto is not per se criminal, but it does expose companies to a heightened risk. So either if you're acquiring a company that deals in crypto, you have to make sure that that compliance program, your KYC, your AML program are in tune with the risk. And not only that, but we know from that updated program that really there should be a process of continuously monitoring. These exchanges with crypto happen very quickly. And I think if you're going to be accepting crypto or dealing with a crypto partner, that your compliance program is up to snuff and it's not just statically, you're just doing like an annual review or something. It just can't be that way. And the last thing we know from that compliance or various other things, but the other one I wanted to highlight, obviously training, but in addition to that is really lessons learned, right? There's a new case coming out in this field every single day. There's a new fraud scheme that's coming out. There's no new crimes, right? The crimes are the same. We haven't invented a new crime, but there's definitely new ways of achieving those crimes. And I think companies need to be up to snuff on how are those crimes being executed? How is your crypto exchange being used to further a ransom attack, right? Those are the questions that are being asked, because it does open up companies and individuals to potential liability and potentially criminal liability. So I think that would be my key takeaways for corporations as well as executives who are dealing in crypto.
Thank you. So let me do this, guys. I know we want to finish up on time, which is 10 minutes. So obviously I just want to point out one thing. We do have a slide in here where somebody from Ryan Corner, the head of CI from the LA office, just a quote, it's one of our top priorities. We're looking at cryptocurrency from several different perspectives, obviously one being tax crimes. We've had over 3.5 billion in seizures. This is in 21. That accounted for 93% of all assets seized by tax enforcement. And CI has prioritized training and the deployment of cryptocurrency, blockchain, and open source intelligence in their cyber financial schemes. And as you can see, Gary is using his expertise. There's obviously very significant crimes and penalties, and corporate crimes and corporate penalties for companies involved in this can be draconian, including for foreign companies. I mean, look at the Swiss bank program, which I really do believe this is similar to that, as you begin with the John Does and then move on to taxpayers and up the chain for facilitators. I mean, who would have thought 80 Swiss banks would have settled with the government? I think it's 85 Swiss banks, but the IRS has the playbook. DOJ is involved, and I think this is going to move in that direction. So we have a lot of slides on SEC enforcement. And John, as I've mentioned, is a true expert in this area. We don't have somebody from the SEC, but the slides are there. John and folks can cover that. John's going to spend 5 minutes just covering that, and then we're going to come back for final words from our panelists. But
I can play both sides. So the SECs over here, they're going to say, hey, look, are cryptocurrency as security? That's a big deal because it's not a security for them. They don't have jurisdiction. Is it a commodity? Does the CFTC have jurisdiction? So these things aren't necessarily even criminal, but the point of this mini section here is to get everyone thinking like, hey, even without the crime, there's a problem here, and there could be a crime. And so, and I've seen some comments pop up. In these situations where the securities laws it's not a note or a bond or a stock certificate, something which is readily a security. There's something called a financial instrument, an investment contract, and there's a test. It's called the Howey test. And in its core, it's right here on the slide. Is there an investment of money in a common enterprise with a reasonable expectation of profits derived from the efforts of others? The whole issue with crypto is the third. I mean, because there's clearly money being exchanged. There is some common enterprise. The question is it from an expectation of another? And that's kind of the hope, the things that are being litigated. So people out there offering cryptocurrency or having a fund in cryptocurrency without getting registered with the SEC, because if you want to sell a security, you have to either register with the SEC or you have to get an exemption to registration. And so we could flip the slide, Joe. And so, the SEC, the last chairman, his statement that there are different types of crypto assets. There are tokens which are used to finance products. There are none that I've seen that are not securities. So they're taking a really expansive view, and there are exceptions, a really expansive view that these things are securities. The current chairman, Gensler, has described the whole cryptocurrency market as pretty much the Wild West. In the fact that, the question of investor protection, finance, issuance, trading, it's more of the Wild West, or the old world of buyer beware. And certainly, I spent a lot of time in the SEC, defense realm, and there's a lot of frauds. There's a lot of, light fraud scams that are using, the crypto is the new cool thing. I mean, years ago, it was FCC wireless licenses or regular currency trading. It's whatever they think the thing is. I think maybe Jamie or Perry said it. They kind of just shoehorn it in. It's like, okay, this is the shiny new thing that you're looking for. And so the issue with this is why people should be mindful of this. Next slide, please. Is that there's been a series of cases brought by, and this one case, Virgil, which actually was prosecuted by Perry's office in the SEC, basically charged a fund which was involved in selling crypto or investing in crypto assets. The problem was it was effectively, a Ponzi. It was the commingled assets. It was just a good old-fashioned fraud. Tens of millions of dollars were stolen. So on one hand, the U.S. Attorney's Office could reach this under the mail and wire fraud statutes, conspiracy statutes, but the SEC still has to prove that it's securities before they can even get in there. And let's go another slide, please. What's more interesting, and I wanted to just point out for people who are listening, is that even in cases where it's not a fraud, it's just simply a security. And the securities registration process was put in place to have information disclosure about the risks and rewards of the investment. What the SEC has done in a number of these cases is they've gone and said, look, I want a Section 5 case, which is basically it's a security. You're going to have to take an injunction that it's security. You're going to have to pay a fine, and in many of the cases, you're going to have to basically, disgorge / offer rescission to all these people. So people who are thinking, I'm investing in this, one, some of the money's gone because the promoters took it. Two, there's going to be a fine because it wasn't registered. And three, what you get back is going to be probably, maybe 50 cents a dollar, maybe less. So that's like a whole risk area. And I'm sure, Jamie and Perry and other prosecutors are seeing this overlaid with enough intent. But even without criminal intent, even without recklessness or scienter under the securities laws, you can be a situation where you have these Section 5 cases where it's basically, the thing's not going to fly, you're going to lose your money. So that's kind of that's an additional risk factor for people to look at. And there's a lot of controversy over whether, something should be registered again by the Commodities Futures Trading Commission of the SEC. But at the end of the day, if you're losing money, I don't think you care which agency is there. So that's the SEC from the top of the trees in 5 minutes.
John, you are the man. You brought it home. Thank you so much. You are a Jersey guy, and you can do it. So, so very quickly, last word, John, your final thoughts.
Oh God, that's hard to make me go first. But I still think I'll echo Chairman Gensler. Let's buyer beware, at least for now, with cryptocurrency. But I'm going to join Mei Ling. There's no substitute for diligence and knowing your customer.
Okay, key right into Mei Ling. Your final thoughts, Mei Ling.
I think my final thought would be, and again, this is going along with the evaluation of corporate compliance program, is that there's an opportunity now to become compliant and to do what has been called for, whether you're talking about taxes or you're talking about the operation of your due diligence program and your compliance program at your company. So I think the time is now. So there are opportunities to do that and show growth so that you're not facing a Jamie or a Perry or a Gary in the near future.
Fair enough. Thank you. Gary, the legend, final thoughts.
I say that in taxation, for the field that I got into, we're all on the same team. So whatever can get us to voluntary compliance in terms of taxes, if it's someone filing a accurate return or looking at potentially their risk tolerance potentially amended or talking to a tax professional, whatever gets us to voluntary compliance. So as I said, that's the reason we prioritize doing these speaking, because we really are all on the same side in terms of getting taxes paid.
Gary quoting Bruce Springsteen, nobody wins unless everybody wins. Appreciate you, Gary. Jamie Hoxie, last thought.
I would just say, sometimes we hear that, well, my client didn't know about the underlying illegal activity. You don't have money laundering. And I guess this is a warning, a shot across the bow. Like, we're not just looking at money laundering. There are a lot of other criminal statutes that are implicated by using crypto in a reckless way or to help criminal activity or to avoid regulation. And we're looking at all of those. And so I imagine that we will see further prosecutions of individuals and entities who are trying to skirt by as opposed to being compliance minded.
Thanks, Jamie. Perry, is vegetable lasagna really lasagna? And then your final thought.
It's not. If it doesn't have sausage, it's not real lasagna.
I appreciate that. I agree.
All right.
Final thought.
Final thought. High level key takeaway. Whenever new technology is developed, there's often a lag in government response. I think the upshot here of this discussion today is that we're at the end of that lag time, and the government now writ large is responding in a way that demonstrates that they've caught up and are proposing meaningful solutions. And particularly as it relates to the IRS, it's really important to make sure that clients are informed, because the grace period is really over.
Thanks, Perry. And the final CLE code is, in fairness to mailing, Norton 1. I wanted this to be Formula 1 in homage to a show I discovered doing COVID, Formula 1 Drive to Survive. It's once you start watching it, you're hooked. Who knew? But it's Norton 1 in fairness to mailing. And my final word is, if you're out there, look, I mean, like Jamie said, these emails exist. And if you're running a company and you're in this business, who knows what your sales folks are saying, what people may be saying. They may be out there telling this. And if that happens, and if you haven't done some sort of due diligence or done training to your folks to make sure they're not doing that, and DOJ, Perry, Jamie, or Gary find those emails, then you're going to be held liable as a company. If you're in private equity and you're on a board and you acquire a company and that's happening below you, you may be held liable. So now's the time to find out, because these guys are smart. They're coming. They're fair, but if that's out there and you're not looking at it now, that there's going to be a problem down the road. The grace period is over. And if you're investing in this and you're not looking at thinking about it from a tax perspective, as Gary said, they're throwing a strike right down the middle of the plate. And if you swing and miss at that right now, it's going to be a problem. So look at that and talk to someone who can help you, whoever that may be. So anyway, thanks, folks. And we are out of here at 1:31. So thank you again. And we're going to address the questions. We'll get back to folks later. We just didn't want to interrupt the law enforcement people. So thanks again. We appreciate you signing in. Everybody take care and have a good day. Thanks. Thanks, guys.
Yes.